Beep, boop, I'm in a Joop. The Wookie finally drives a proper Jeep, and what better way than going to the absolute beginning of the American icon than with a 1948 Willys-Overland CJ-2A. The current Jeep Wrangler is indeed an American icon. It represents the adventurous American and traces its roots back to the original Willys-Overland Jeeps of World War II. Many have argued that the Jeep helped win the war, as its four-wheel drive combined with its light weight helped troops maneuver around easier where the larger 3/4 ton and 1 3/4 and 1 1/2 ton vehicles couldn't. Germany's closest answer, Volkswagen's Type 82 Kubelwagen, lacked the four-wheel drive that made the Jeep so capable. While the military would outgrow its 1/4 ton to 1/4 ton vehicles over a common vehicle that would become the Humvee, Willys and the following parent companies that owned the line would continue with the heritage of the Jeep being sold to adventurous civilians to this day. If you own a Wrangler today, you can thank this simple machine for your air-conditioned off-roader. So while we have an example of one of the original Jeeps sold on the civilian market, let's really dig into the history of the development of what would become the Jeep. At the start of World War II, the U.S. Army began the search and development of a low-profile swift vehicle for the infantry. It had become apparent that beefed-up half-ton trucks weren't going to cut it for them, and the half-ton designation in the Army got scrapped in favor of two groups. The 3/4 ton, which would spawn the Dodge WC, the forebear to their own Powell wagon, and the 1/4 ton. In the 1930s, the Infantry Board of Fort Benning became intrigued with the British Army's use of militarized Austin 7s. And obtained a few cars from the American Austin Company in Pennsylvania to test their idea. During this time, American Austin had gone bankrupt, had been bought out, and was renamed American Bantam. With troubles brewing in Europe, Bantam kept their pressure on the Army to look further into the idea of a compact military vehicle, and by June 1940, Major Robert Howe had drawn up the specifications for such a vehicle. It needed to be four-wheel drive with this 2-speed part-time transfer case, have 3 bucket seats, a folded windshield, a 1,200-pound weight, a payload of 600 pounds, a wheelbase of no more than 75 inches, a maximum collapsible height of 36 inches, and a top speed of at least 50 miles an hour. The Second Great War was well underway, so time was of the essence. Manufacturers had 11 days to submit their bids, 49 days to submit the first prototype, and 75 days to have a fleet of 70 test vehicles. American Bantam, Willys-Overland, and late entrant Ford were the 3 entries, and low bidder Willys would lose out to Bantam due to not only asking for more time, but Bantam being the only manufacturer producing their pilot and test models in the 49 and 75 days. Bantam decided to go with Continental's 112 cubic inch 4-cylinder engine that produced 45 horsepower and 86 foot-pounds of torque. A Warner gear, precursor to the Borg-Warner transmission, was used, and a Spicer transfer case and axles from the Studebaker Champion would be used. Using stamped body panels, the curved body of the Bantam reconnaissance car, or BRC for short, bore a striking difference in look compared to what would become famously known in the war. The BRC Pilot, as it was known, met all of the Army's requirements other than torque and weight. But it was a success, and Bantam soon got its fleet of test vehicles, known as Bantam BRC-60s. But soon it became apparent that the small Pennsylvania company wouldn't be able to meet the production requirements of the military, so their blueprints would be given to Ford and Willys to help hasten the development and production. Willys's Quad and Ford's Pygmy were then submitted. Both were approved, and soon orders of 1,500 for all 3 models were requested. At this time, the Army recognized that the 1,200-pound weight was vastly unrealistic, and that spec was revised to 2,160 pounds. Bantam's BRC-60 would be revised into the BRC-40, and was praised as having the best steering, suspension, brakes, fuel economy, and by far being the lightest. But soon it was falling behind on its 75 Jeep-a-day production cycle, and full production contracts would be instead awarded to Willys and Ford. Ford's Pygmy became the GP for production, and introduced the famous stamped grille, followed by Willys's MA. All of these early run Jeeps would go on to serve the British and Soviet militaries due to land lease agreements in their fronts raging on. By July of 1941, it was agreed upon by the War Department that the program was a success, but it needed to be streamlined down to a single manufacturer. Bantam obviously couldn't keep up with its initial demand despite their arguably superior model, so Willys would win it over Ford due to having the more powerful engine of the two. Willys' L134 Go Devil 4-cylinder, sourced from its Americar, saw praise from soldiers everywhere. Mass production would go into full effect, and the final production model that would truly carry the torch for American soldiers would carry the name MB. The MB would feature the culmination of design ideas and cues from both the Bantam and Ford models, with Ford's stamped grille from the GP being the most notable feature. The mass production MB introduced several new technologies for mass production, such as CV joints for the front drive wheels and the use of a transfer case for four-wheel drive. And finally, despite Ford's protests that they could further improve the design with their contracted GPW to fill in additional Jeep production by providing an even more powerful engine, the War Department demanded that Ford stick to the common blueprints that Willys had. Flash forward a couple of years, and by 1944, the war was starting to wind down. So what was next? Willys knew they had a potential hit on their hands for the civilian market, so development began on the CJ project, short for Civilian Jeep. The CJ would essentially take on the MB and outfit it for civilian use. While not really intended to be a street vehicle, it was more essentially aimed at more of being a farm use vehicle, similar to what we now use side-by-side ATVs for. Only one or two CJ-1 prototypes were known to exist, as they were essentially very minimally modified MBs. But soon a fleet of 40 to 45 CJ-2A Jeeps were in prototype testing phase. 13 of those CJ-2s are known to survive to this day, and their biggest changes compared to the MB included a tailgate, PTO, the Spicer T90 transmission, 5.38 to 1 axle gears, and a 2.43 to 1 low range. On July 17, 1945, full production had started, now with the full production model carrying the designation of CJ-2A to reflect the small differences between the full production model over the CJ-2 Jeeps. Early models would use up the remaining MB parts such as the rear end housing, engine blocks, and some rare cases of modified MB frames. A multitude of plant strikes at their Toledo, Ohio plant hindered production from 1945 to 1946, but by 1947, CJ-2As, also known as Universal Jeeps, were flying out the door for farming, ranching, and industrial applications. Unlike a modern Wrangler, a flat fender Jeep, especially a CJ-2A, is a very simple beast. This is a vehicle from the 1940s, so it originally came with a 6-volt battery system. Of course, this one's been long since converted to 12-volt. No seatbelts, of course, but a previous owner sometime in the Jeep's life had installed lap belts from some sort of 80s GM product. First gear isn't synchronized, so as someone learning to drive this old Jeep, I never really attempted the engine brake into first like one normally would with a manual transmission. Other than that, the gear doesn't really have a feel. Like, it really doesn't feel like it goes into first like it goes into the other two gears. But you put the shifter in the spot, and of course it was. The only factory storage in the interior is this bin underneath the passenger seat. And the said passenger seat wasn't standard on the CJ-2A. In fact, the options list on the CJ-2A is pretty wild. Like I mentioned before, these were sold to be more as farm equipment over what you would think of a Jeep today. Again, 1940s equivalent of a side-by-side. Let's go down that options list just to get a rough idea. A front passenger seat, a rear seat, center rear view mirror, a canvas top, a front power takeoff, or PTO, a rear PTO, belt pulley drive, capstan winch, governor, a rear hydraulic lift, a snowplow, a welder, a generator, a mower, a cutting disc, front bumper weight, heavy-duty springs, dual vacuum windshield wipers. Stock CJ-2As were equipped with a manual wiper on the passenger side and a vacuum wiper on the driver's side. Dual taillights. Stock CJ-2As had a taillight on the driver's side and a reflector on the passenger side. Hot climate radiator, drive shaft guards, heater, side steps, and radiator brush guard. If you go to a Jeep show like the Bantam Jeep Festival in Butler, Pennsylvania, you will see a lot of restored and not restored flat fenders with a lot of the wild aftermarket PTO add-ons like wood splitters and the aforementioned mower and hydraulic lift. Now, for the test drive on the road, it is sketchy. This was never meant for modern roads and traffic. I putted around China Grove, North Carolina with a lot of apprehension. Don't get me wrong, I had a blast. But this is a tiny vehicle with no crash protection and nothing more than some 80s era lap belts keeping you in the seat. The owner, Alex, said the belts are mainly to keep you in the bucket seat, as if you're not paying attention, it wouldn't really be outside the realm of possibility to fall out of the Jeep considering there's no doors. The steering is tractor-like, floaty until it suddenly isn't, which isn't exactly confidence building going around a gradual curve down a hill. Clutch is there, but the lack of oomph from the 74-year-old Go Devil means you kinda have a thin line between riding the clutch and stalling it out. As Alex would mention on our drive, these were designed for people who simply didn't know how to drive and had to learn on the fly in the military. So basically, you were expected to have to abuse it to really get anywhere with it, which is something one who worries about breaking a 74-year-old piece of machinery for their small YouTube channel doesn't really enjoy. It was certainly a moment of pushing away the anxiety and just letting the thrill of the experience from some World War II in all its glory just shine on through. But, yeah, this thing's not meant for modern roads, and of all the vehicles I've reviewed on Wookie drives, this is easily probably the sketchiest drive I've been on. The owner of this particular CJ-2A, Alex, purchased it from his brother-in-law a couple years back, and he's slowly been returning it to roadworthy status since. He's gotten all the brakes replaced, a Willwood dual circuit master cylinder, an aftermarket distributor, replaced the fuel pump, a new coil, and the aforementioned 12-volt conversion. Like one would expect from a 74-year-old vehicle, it's got its quirks. And a lot of them are repairs in engineering over the course of its 74-year-old life. When Alex replaced the old ignition coil, he discovered that someone had relocated to the side of the block, where one of the bolts holding it in was drilled and bolted directly through a water jacket. The original Weber carburetor had long since been replaced with an extremely temperamental Solix carburetor. He doesn't plan on replacing the Solix with a Weber eventually, because the Solix has been giving him fits up until very recently, and he doesn't want to tempt fate for too much longer with it. The tailgate, the biggest differentiator that you can use between a CJ-2A and MB, has long since been welded to the tub. And this storage container in the back? Yep, that's a square D fuse box that someone took upon themselves to recycle into a handy trunk. Also, the axles are out of a CJ-5, and the gear is not factory to a CJ-2A, so the speedometer is nowhere near close to being right. The 1948 Willys-Overland CJ-2A was the start of something special in the American auto industry. The Jeep has been a constant since 1945, with the exception of 1996, and is an icon for those seeking adventure. Now, its current descendant is a tad far from the humble beginnings of selling a small military vehicle to the American farmer to use on farms and move about on ranches. But you can directly trace the Wrangler back to this, the CJ-2A, and the start of the civilian Jeep line. Boomers will scream at the top of their lungs that the Jeep won the war, and they provided the much-needed maneuverability on the battlefield on the Western Front. These were basic little vehicles that could be fixed with some mud and twine, and were designed so any old 18-year-old straight out of basic could jump in and drive. They were the perfect vehicle for the army of the time, and these reasons are why they took off when they did when they sold in the civilian market. Yes, the Jeep has grown over time, but it's an American icon that has helped several parent companies stay afloat and provide a reason why they should merge or be bought out by other giant parent companies. 1948 Willys-Overland Jeep CJ-2A, the humble birth of an American icon. Have a good day, everyone. Thank you once again for watching another episode of Wookie Drives. This week's episode comes courtesy of Alex of Salisbury, North Carolina. Huge shout out for letting me drive his piece of World War II nostalgia on the streets. It was certainly an adventure, and as sketchy as it might be on modern roads, it's certainly an experience and it's some of the most fun I've had doing Wookie drives, so huge shout out to Alex. If you have a car or truck you'd like to see on the show and happen to be in the Charlotte, North Carolina area, feel free to email me at wookiedrives@gmail.com with your car. That's right, submit your car to wookiedrives@gmail.com. That is wookiedrives@gmail.com. Be sure to give the video a like, share with all your flat fender Jeep friends, yell at me in the comments. Honestly, any sort of feedback or interaction really helps this channel grow. And don't forget to hit subscribe and hit that bell for more Wookie drives like these. Thank you so much for watching and have a good day.
How about winning a Willys Jeep for your family, or a Bell & Howell movie camera and projector, or a Columbia bicycle? It's easy in the Roy Rogers Family Contest, sponsored by delicious Post cereals, now on display at your grocer's. All you do is take an entry blank from the display, or on a plain piece of paper write, in 25 words or less, which Post cereal is your family's favorite and why. Take Post Grape Nuts Flakes, for instance, the delicious whole wheat flakes with that wonderful malty rich flavor. They start giving you energy in 2 minutes. Get a package and enter the contest today. Just think what a picnic your family could have with a Willys Jeep. And how about family movies with that camera and projector by Bell & Howell? And the boys and girls really love those Columbia bikes, the latest models. It all adds up to 154 prizes this week and every week through June 5th. Lots of chances to win, so you enter often. With each entry include one Post cereal box top. Send your entries right away to Roy Rogers Family Contest, Box 1, Brooklyn 1, New York. Each contest closes Saturday midnight. See your grocer for details.